You know the guy. I mean, I guarantee you have someone specific in your head right now.
Oh, absolutely, all do.
Right. He's the one who just seems to have his life like engineered to absolute perfection.
Mm.
He's pulling these 60-hour work weeks without a single complaint. He's at the gym by 5 a.m., crushing his macros. His lawn is immaculate, and he is just the rock for his family.
Yeah, the classic pillar of the community.
Exactly. But if you spend enough time around him, you start noticing the cracks. You know, maybe his reaction to getting cut off in traffic is just a little too explosive. Or maybe those 2 craft beers on a Friday night have quietly turned into, like, a nightly ritual just to numb his racing thoughts.
Right.
And beneath that highly optimized, armor-plated exterior, he is drowning in a kind of isolation he doesn't even have the vocabulary to describe.
Welcome to Let's Talk About Wellness, the podcast from Providers for Healthy Living. Today, we are taking a deep dive into the 2026 landscape of men's mental health. We're looking at a really massive stack of recent data, including the Equimundo State of the World's Men report, clinical trials from November, and the latest sociological research.
Well, all data.
It is. But our mission today isn't just to, list off statistics. We want to uncover the underlying mechanisms of modern masculinity. We need to understand what is driving this silent epidemic, how our culture is completely misinterpreting the warning signs, and crucially, how we can practically intervene before it's too late.
See, I'm struggling a bit to square that picture you just painted with the narrative we've been handed for decades. Because culturally, we've always sort of operated under the assumption that men simply don't experience depression at the same rates as women.
Right, that's the standard myth.
Yeah, or at the very least, we tell ourselves the guys are just, less emotionally complex. Like, the stereotype is that if a man is suffering, he just needs to get off the couch, stop being stubborn, and ask for therapy. Are you saying that entire premise is just flawed?
It is fundamentally flawed, yeah. And honestly, that misconception is actively costing lives. To understand why, let's look at what I call the check engine light analogy.
Okay, I love a good analogy. Lay it on me.
So when a woman experiences clinical depression, her psychological distress often manifests as an internalized check engine light. The symptoms map perfectly onto our standard medical diagnostic manuals.
Like tearfulness, profound sadness, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cheerfulness, lethargy, withdrawal from social activities. It's a very clear, recognizable dashboard warning that says, hey, I'm dealing with depression.
So because it aligns with our cultural definition of depression, the medical community knows exactly how to spot it. Like the roadmap is clear.
Precisely. But when you look at how men process profound distress, they frequently display an externalized check engine light. The engine is running dangerously hot, and it's revving incredibly loud to overcompensate.
Oh, wow. So what does that actually look like?
Their psychological pain doesn't look like crying in bed. It looks like sudden aggression, extreme irritability, road rage, compulsive workaholism, and intense risk-taking.
Wow.
It is the exact same broken engine, the exact same underlying depressive or anxiety disorder, but the dashboard warning is entirely different.
Hold on, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around the clinical side of this.
Yeah.
If a guy is experiencing a severe depressive episode, but his primary symptom is snapping at his kids and working until midnight, a doctor is going to completely miss the root cause.
Almost every time.
Like, a physician might just tell him his blood pressure is high, prescribe a vacation, or tell him to manage his stress. They aren't going to pull out a depression screening for a guy who just seems, highly ambitious and a little tightly wound.
And that is the exact blind spot in our medical system. And the consequences of that blind spot are devastating. We have this really pervasive myth that the high male suicide rate is driven by men refusing to engage with the healthcare system.
Right, the stubborn guy who won't go to the doctor.
Exactly. But when you dig into the data, you find that over 60% of men who die by suicide in the US and Canada actually accessed mental health or medical services in the year prior to their death.
Wait, really? 60%?
Yep, over 60%.
That completely shatters the stubborn male stereotype. I mean, you're telling me the majority of these men did seek help. They were literally sitting in an exam room across from a professional, actively looking for a lifeline.
They were in the room.
Yeah.
But because our entire diagnostic framework is built around looking for that internalized, tearful check engine light, the professionals completely overlook the externalized warning signs.
That is so tragic.
It really is. A man mentions he's drinking more and feeling furious all the time, and the clinician writes it off as a lifestyle issue rather than a massive red flag for severe depression. The system failed them because it was looking for the wrong signals.
So that forces us to look at the underlying mechanics here. Like, why is the engine running so hot in the first place? If psychological distress is erupting as road rage and 60-hour work weeks, what is the specific pressure cooker creating that environment today?
Sociologists point directly to something called the provider paradox. We are living in 2026. The world has undergone massive socioeconomic shifts. And yet, the data shows that 86% of men still define their core sense of manhood primarily through their ability to be a financial provider.
Okay, playing devil's advocate for a second here. How is that even statistically possible today? Dual income households are the standard. The macroeconomic landscape is entirely different from the 1950s. It seems wild to me that almost 90% of men are still anchoring their entire self-worth to their paycheck.
I know it seems super counterintuitive, but the pressure is actually amplifying, particularly among younger generations. Equimundo tracks adherence to the man box.
Wait, the man box?
Yeah, it's a sociological term for the rigid traditional rules of masculinity. So absolute stoicism, dominance, emotional suppression, and extreme self-reliance. And their data reveals that adherence to these rigid rules is actually increasing among young men, not decreasing.
Ah, I see where this collision happens. You have young men desperately trying to adhere to this 1950s Mad Men standard of being the sole unshakable rock of the family.
Exactly.
But they are trying to do it in the 2026 economy where AI is displacing white-collar jobs, inflation is squeezing the middle class, and the gig economy offers, like, zero stability. They're being judged by an old-world metric in a new-world economy that simply won't let them achieve it.
That is the core mechanism of the crisis. When economic precarity threatens that provider role,
Mm.
men don't just process it as a career setback, they process it as a fundamental failure of their identity as men.
Man, that's heavy.
It is. And the psychological fallout is severe. Research indicates that men facing serious financial instability are 16.3 times more likely to report suicidal thoughts compared to financially secure men.
Think about the magnitude of that number. A 16.3 times multiplier. That isn't just stress. That is an identity collapse.
And it creates a fatal double bind when paired with the man box. If a man believes his only value is his paycheck, and he's failing at that, he is already in crisis. But if man box also dictates that showing vulnerability makes him weak, he is forbidden from talking to anyone about that crisis.
Oh, this is just totally trapped.
Completely. He is trapped in a burning house and told that asking for a fire extinguisher is a sign of weakness. Those who rigidly hold on to those man box beliefs face an additional 6.3 times increase in suicidal ideation.
Which gives profound context to the loneliness epidemic. I mean, if you are listening to this right now and picturing your husband, your brother, or your son, consider what it does to a person to carry that weight in total silence. It completely aligns with the Gallup and Equimundo data showing that 25% of men report having zero close friends for emotional support. Not one person they can drop the armor around. Over 60% of men report feeling that nobody really knows who they are.
And when you combine economic powerlessness with total emotional isolation, you create a vacuum. And human beings cannot survive in a vacuum. They will seek out a sense of control and community wherever they can find it.
And if the real world is rejecting them and their social circles are basically non-existent, they migrate to the one place that promises immediate answers, right? The internet. Which pulls us right into one of the most alarming phenomena of 2026. This digital frontier of male body image, specifically this massive trend known as looksmaxing.
Right. Looksmaxing is the obsessive, highly systematized pursuit of maximizing physical attractiveness.
Yeah.
But it's not just about vanity. It is driven by this deterministic, fatalistic belief that a man's facial bone structure and physical symmetry dictate his entire social, economic, and romantic worth in society.
So I've seen fragments of this on social media, and honestly, at first glance, it just looks like intense grooming. I mean, I use a daily moisturizer, I hit the gym. Am I technically participating in softmaxing? Why is this suddenly being flagged as a psychiatric concern?
Well, it's important to separate basic hygiene from the pathology of the trend. Softmaxing does start with skincare routines, gym habits, and things like mewing.
Mewing?
Yeah, it's a tongue posture trend, claiming to naturally reshape the jawline,
Yeah.
despite zero clinical evidence. On the surface, it mimics self-care. But you have to look at the motivation using the crumbling foundation analogy.
Oh, I love a good analogy. Walk us through it.
Imagine a house with a fundamentally crumbling foundation. The ground is giving way, the pipes are ruptured, the structural integrity is entirely compromised. But instead of addressing the massive structural failure, the owner decides to obsessively, compulsively repaint the front door.
Right.
He sands it down and repaints it for 12 hours a day, convinced that if he can just achieve the absolute perfect shade of red, the entire house will somehow be saved.
Wow, that paints such a tragic picture. The real issue is the profound loneliness and the lack of economic control, the crumbling foundation. But because they can't fix the economy or, instantly cure their isolation, they fixate on the one thing they can control, the angle of their jawline.
It is entirely about manufacturing a sense of control. When a young man is spending 6 hours a day on obscure forums, having strangers rate the millimeter distances between his facial features, that is not a skincare routine.
No, definitely not.
It is a desperate attempt to optimize his way out of misery. Clinically, this is presenting as explosive rates of male body dysmorphic disorder and muscle dysmorphia.
And it has a distinctly different flavor than the eating disorders we typically see discussed in the media. Historically, female-presenting dysmorphia has centered around extreme thinness, but this male iteration is aggressively fixated on leanness, this impossible superhuman comic book physique with extreme muscular hypertrophy and essentially 0% body fat.
Exactly.
And when that isn't enough, they push past the superficial layer into something much darker.
Yeah, that boundary crossing is what they call hard maxing. This is the escalation into high-risk interventions. Young men are seeking out dangerous cosmetic surgeries, agonizing leg-lengthening procedures to add 2 inches to their height, rampant use of black-market performance-enhancing drugs, and even a practice called bone smashing.
Wait, I remember reading the reports on bone smashing and thinking it had to be like an internet hoax.
I wish it were.
The fact that young men are literally taking blunt objects to their own cheekbones, hoping the microfractures will heal into a more aggressively angular, quote-unquote, masculine shape, is just horrifying. It shows how deep the desperation runs.
And this is where the architecture of the internet weaponizes that desperation. The algorithms on these platforms don't want to heal young man's insecurity. They want to monetize his engagement. The Turing Institute recently published research revealing that 44% of looks-maxing videos on TikTok are strategically tagged with extremist, radicalizing hashtags.
So a 15-year-old kid goes online looking for a way to clear up his acne or get a better haircut because he feels invisible at school. And within a few swipes, the algorithm isn't just selling him face wash, it's selling him an ideology.
Precisely.
It's feeding him the black pill philosophy, telling him that society is rigged against him, that women are to blame for his loneliness, and that aggression is his only recourse.
The pursuit of a sharper jawline acts as a highly efficient algorithmic funnel directly into misogyny and political radicalization. The internet identifies their isolation and offers them a community built entirely on shared resentment.
Which is exactly why pulling them out of that algorithmic echo chamber and into the real world is so vital. Before we talk about how to actually intervene and build that resilience, I want to make sure people know where to turn.
For those of you listening in Ohio who are looking for a safe space and professional support, you can find our team at providersforhealthyliving.com.
Absolutely. Having those offline, compassionate off-ramps is the only way to combat the digital radicalization. And while the landscape we've discussed so far sounds incredibly grim, the data from the last few years actually points to a massive, highly encouraging paradigm shift.
Oh, totally. We are turning a corner here.
I am so glad, because there is genuine momentum building. If you look at millennial and Gen Z men, they are fundamentally rewriting the script. Proactive help-seeking among men has nearly doubled since 2002, sitting at 17.3% today.
It's fantastic to see.
It really is. It seems like the younger generations are looking at the man box, looking at the stoic, white-knuckling existence of the generations before them and saying, no thanks, that looks exhausting.
They are actively rejecting the premise that silent suffering is a requirement for masculinity. And we are seeing the corporate world desperately trying to catch up to this shift. For decades, the workplace was the ultimate proving ground for the man box, a place where you basically checked your humanity at the door.
Right.
But the 2026 data shows that the economic cost of emotional concealment is just too massive to ignore.
The productivity numbers alone are staggering. When men feel forced to hide their mental health struggles in a corporate environment, they are 4 times more likely to call out of work and 5 times more likely to quit entirely. Companies are realizing that forcing guys to wear armor all day is bleeding their bottom line. But how do you actually change that culture? Like, how do you get a mid-level manager to engage with therapy before his engine completely blows out?
You do it through a brilliant translation of language. Forward-thinking clinics and corporate wellness programs are stripping away the clinical hospital gown stigma of traditional therapy and reframing it entirely as mental fitness.
Oh, that terminology changes everything. Therapy sounds like something you do because you are broken and need fixing. Mental fitness sounds like something you do because you want a competitive edge. It pulls it out of the psychiatric ward and puts it right next to executive coaching and physical training.
It perfectly aligns with how men are already socialized to view self-improvement. Think about an elite athlete. A professional quarterback doesn't wait until his rotator cuff is completely torn off the bone to visit a physical therapist, right?
Right, he does preventative stuff.
Exactly. He does preventative mobility work to ensure peak performance. Mental fitness applies that exact same logic to the prefrontal cortex. It's proactive coaching for your brain to build stress resilience, emotional agility, and communication skills.
So the marketing is working and guys are showing up to the metaphorical gym. But it brings us back to the failure we discussed earlier. If guys are finally sitting in the chair, are the clinicians actually trained to see the externalized check engine light? Like if a guy comes in talking about mental fitness, is the therapist still going to miss his depression because he isn't crying?
Well, that was the critical bottleneck for sure. But the clinical innovations over the past few years have been incredible. Organizations like Movember have spearheaded specialized training protocols, such as their Men in Mind e-learning program. This is fundamentally retraining the psychiatric community to understand male socialization.
Okay, so what does that actually look like in the room, practically speaking?
It means that instead of a therapist subtly shaming a man for not expressing his sadness the quote-unquote right way, the therapist speaks his language.
Right.
If a man is expressing his distress through anger and hypervigilance, the therapist recognizes that as a misplaced protective drive. They can say, hey, you are fiercely dedicated to protecting your family, but right now your stress response is actually hurting them. Let's use your drive to problem solve to engineer a better coping mechanism. They leverage his positive masculine traits rather than fighting them.
I love that. They are treating his natural instincts as an asset rather than a pathology. And that has to drastically improve the retention rate in therapy, right? Like, men aren't walking out after one session feeling misunderstood.
The clinical trials of the Men in Mind training show exactly that. Practitioners are reporting massive surges in their confidence to treat male patients, and the men are staying in therapy longer and reporting vastly higher satisfaction rates. We are finally weaving a safety net that is actually designed to catch them.
That gives me so much hope for the systemic level. But let's pause here because we really need to be clear about the boundaries of clinical care versus peer support.
Absolutely. This podcast is for educational purposes only and does not substitute for professional medical or mental health advice. Please consult a qualified professional for diagnosis and treatment. If you or a family member are in immediate crisis, please call a crisis hotline, dial 988 in the U.S., call 911, or go to the nearest emergency room for assistance.
With those professional boundaries established, let's talk about the listener. If you are listening to this on your commute or in your kitchen and you recognize these external check engine lights in your best friend, your partner, or your dad, how do you actually pierce through that armor tonight? What is the practical framework for the everyday person?
The most effective, actionable tool developed for peer support is the ALEC model. It's an acronym that stands for Ask, Listen, Encourage Action, and Check In.
Let's break the mechanics of that down, because ask has to mean more than just throwing out a casual, hey man, how's it going, while you're watching a football game.
Oh, definitely. It requires specificity and observation. You don't ask a vague question. You anchor it to a behavior. You say, hey, I've noticed you've been incredibly irritable lately, and you're drinking a lot more than usual. What is actually going on? You name the external check engine light, and then you move to the hardest step for most people. Listen.
Which means fighting the urge to immediately solve the problem. As soon as a guy hears his friend is struggling, his instinct is to grab a wrench and try to fix the engine.
Yeah, but that's not what's needed here.
Right.
It's the exact opposite of what's needed. You don't offer solutions, you don't debate the validity of his feelings, and you definitely don't tell him it could be worse. You just sit in the mud with him. You provide a completely non-judgmental space for him to vocalize the pressure. Once he feels genuinely heard, then you encourage action.
And action doesn't necessarily mean dragging him to an inpatient psychiatric ward.
No, not at all.
It could be micro steps, recommending he prioritize 8 hours of sleep, suggesting you guys go for a run instead of to the bar, Or encouraging him to look into that mental fitness coaching we talked about.
Exactly. You help him find a tangible next step.
Yeah.
But the entire framework falls apart without the final step. Check in. You have to follow up a few days later. Sending a text on a Tuesday that says, hey, just checking in on that conversation we had Saturday. How are you holding up? Proves that your initial question wasn't just polite obligation. It proves that you genuinely care and that he's not invisible.
That follow-through is the exact antidote to the isolation that drives the look-smaxing and the despair. It rebuilds the social scaffolding. Which leads me to the most profound paradigm shift we found in all of this research. We spent the first half of this deep dive talking about the provider paradox, how the expectation to be a financial machine is destroying men. How do we rewrite the core of male identity so it isn't completely tethered to a paycheck?
Well, the most powerful psychological insulator we are seeing in the data is the role of fatherhood. We are seeing a societal redefinition of fatherhood, shifting it from a purely financial obligation to a deeply relational identity. And it is acting as a massive protective factor against male depression and suicide.
Let's explore the psychology behind that. Why does being an emotionally engaged dad protect a man's brain?
It fundamentally rewires his sense of purpose. When a man is entrenched in the provider paradox, his identity is transactional. He is only as valuable as what he earns. But when a man leans heavily into the emotional, nurturing aspects of fatherhood, his identity becomes relational.
That makes total sense.
The data is clear. Fathers who are highly engaged in caregiving are twice as likely to report a profound sense of purpose compared to men without children. Over 80% of them view fatherhood as the single most important job they will ever have.
That completely neutralizes the threat of the economic shifts we talked about earlier. If your entire identity is based on your corporate title, a layoff destroys your world. But if your identity is rooted in being a present, emotionally available caregiver to your children and a supportive partner, the gig economy can't take that away from you. You might lose your job, but you don't lose your reason for existing.
It gives men permission to be fully human. It replaces the brittle, fragile armor of the man box with the deep, unbreakable resilience of human connection. When a man realizes his highest value is his presence, not his production, the pressure cooker finally releases.
It redefines what it actually means to be strong. We spend so much time culturally glorifying the guy who feels nothing and needs no one, when in reality, that guy is just slowly suffocating.
And as we close out this deep dive, that brings up a fascinating thought experiment for the future. We are currently watching millennial and Gen Z men embrace mental fitness, learn the ALEC model, and redefine their worth through emotional engagement rather than just financial provision. So what happens when their children, Generation Alpha, grow up?
That's a really profound thought. I mean, if a young boy grows up in a house where his dad talks openly about his stress, goes to therapy as routinely as he goes to the gym, and values a hug more than a promotion, that boy never even learns the rules of the man box.
Exactly. He won't have to unlearn the stoicism because he was never taught it in the first place. The rigid, silent suffering that has defined masculinity for a century might not just evolve. It might become entirely extinct within a single generation. And that is a future worth working toward.
If this conversation helped you today, please follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or YouTube, and leave us a 5-star review or like, comment, and share the podcast. It helps more people in our community find these resources. We'll talk to you next time.